Yes,
All right, good evening.
made me cry.
Open the meeting for the 28th of March, Finance Committee. Steve and I have taken attendance already. There's a number of folks on, few not here, but we'll get started. Open it up for any public participation. Seeing none. The budgets, we've got veterans, Medicare, group insurance, cable television. Somebody talking? Okay.
Brian Cusack was talking? No?
Sorry.
Okay.
What do you say?
Sorry.
All right, we'll start with the veteran services budget, I guess. Kevin, do you
Yeah, I'll give a quick rundown.
highlights?
Veterans benefits budget, we're requesting an increase to this budget of $3,787. This breaks down as a increase in personal services, $338, which is a step increase for a part-time admin help. I do want to point out the clerical union contract isn't settled, so this will go up once that contract's settled a little bit more. Under contractual services, the increase is $3,349. We increased the professional services line item, $3,079. And this is to cover the increased salaries as part of the municipal agreement we have with Melrose, where we share services with Melrose, Wakefield, and Saugus. Also under contractual services, we increased printing and binding 200, postage 250, reduced the telephone line item $180, all based on usage. Small increase under materials and supplies, $100 for office supplies. The recipient line item, we're level funding at $110,000. I do want to point out that for the recipients' expenditures, we do receive up to 75% reimbursement from the state for those payments. They come in through the cherry sheet. Total budget request for fiscal 25 is $198,300.
Okay. We don't have a subcommittee, right, that reviews this?
No.
So the budget we all have has the 20,000 taken out of the recipient line item.
Right.
That's correct. Added back, is that right?
Correct.
The budget I'm looking at has the recipient down to 90 instead of 110. That changed Monday, is that right?
Yes, correct.
So unless I got the wrong one, I don't know which one you guys got, but,
I got the wrong one as well.
okay,
Yeah, we just didn't,
that's fine. That's fine. Everybody has the same. Questions?
we figured you guys could do the math.
On that question that Jim's raised, I'm looking on a straight line basis. It seems like we'll probably be about 8,300 or so at the end of the fiscal year.
Correct.
And recommended budget overturned is 110. Correct.
Correct.
Okay. Can I ask what the current caseload is and has the caseload changed from last year to this year in terms of numbers?
It does go up and down. It was 10 for most of fiscal 24. I believe in January, it went up to 11. They expect one more person to be going on for 12. So a couple more people have been added.
This is under the 115 section.
Right.
Right.
Okay.
So, I mean, as you know, there are other people that are serviced
Yes, yeah.
that are direct through the VA that never runs through.
Right,
us.
you never see.
Yeah.
So just explain that then, the 115 section is.
115 is the state section that we get reimbursed on.
Right.
Up to 75%, depending on what it is. That's veterans and families. The veterans agent does also provide a lot of service with direct aid from the VA, which never washes through us. It's a direct payment to the veteran or the veteran's family member, never comes through us, but the 115 does through the state.
Good with that?
I'm good with, well, one more question. Professional services, what are we funding on the professional services?
The professional services, we fund out of that. The veteran agent, which is the director over in Melrose, who's a full-time person. So we basically split third of her salary between Melrose, Wakefield, and Saugus. And then We have a dedicated VSO who's part-time, 19 hours a week,
You're funding the personal services.
specifically for the town of Wakefield.
I understand.
No, the personal services on ours is the administrative assistant.
Oh, okay.
Is a part-time admin.
Part-time admin, that same part-time admin works for the Council of Aging part-time, and they're located in the same area, so it works well on that. We created a veteran service district 10 years ago now. Because with our population, we would have to have a full-time veteran service officer. The state would require that, or have a district that kind of covered. So that is the district we created a while ago, and it has worked well in coverage. There's been the Melrose VSO was actually out, and the veteran service agent for the area was not being as attentive to Wakefield as they should have been. I met with the mayor, and we're assured, and we'll be monitoring that
Okay,
in the future.
thank you.
All right, Dan.
Yeah, good evening. So I'm curious about the reduction from 110 down to 90,000 and the recipients line item. Right now, we're tracking at roughly 77,000 for the current year. The population continues to go down. But it seems to me I heard some rumblings about one of the town councilors did not want to reduce that. So is this after, obviously the town council look at this. So is town council blessed this particular budget in front of us? I mean, how did that discussion go?
Town council voted to not reduce that recipients line item to 90,000, which is what's in front of you. They wanted to keep it at 110. So the budget is 198,300. That's the town council budget.
And how do you feel about that?
That is the vote of the town council.
Thank you. But you mentioned it, Dan, so when you look at the.
my request in the budget, Dan.
Right. When you look at the expenditures, what you're saying, Dan, is the 90 would have likely been adequate? Is that what I heard you
Yeah,
say?
more than adequate, yeah.
Kevin?
That is true, but if you look at the expenditures through half the year, that half the year was when there were 10 recipients. Right now, there's 11, and they anticipate a 12th one going on very soon. So it is ticked up a couple since December. So could it be much more? I'm not sure. Possibly.
Yep.
So in fiscal 23, we spent 95,000. How many recipients were there in 2023?
I think there was between 12 and 13, because it does fluctuate. People do come on and off.
So the town administrator still looks at 90,000 as I read this, contrary to what the town council does. I mean, clearly nobody's going to lose out a nickel, but I certainly wouldn't want to have a floor fight over this for $20,000.
Thank you.
I mean, I remember we spent an hour and a half discussing $25,000 for the goose control. So the last thing I want to do is $20,000 and spend an hour at town meeting going back and forth with town council over that.
Dan, that's why I put goose control in the DPW budget instead of an article.
Well, yeah, I agree, but you get my point. I mean, do we want to have, I mean, I'd rather spend my time arguing with the schools than I do with the town council over 20 grand.
I didn't know that. Are you kidding me?
I am not, yeah, right.
And, but we did go from 170 and 23 to 110 and 24.
Right.
Because we had that argument / discussion with town council, and they wanted it back up for a year and then recognized the change in population and activity, correct? Reason?
Yeah, correct. And I think
Yeah.
also doing more outreach as well. And they have been doing more outreach, and maybe that's why they're getting up to 11 and 12. They're increasing the numbers.
And it was that maybe the feel from the town council? I didn't watch the meeting that they wanted to try to continue. to
I think-
price more.
I think, yeah, absolutely. I want to do as much for the veterans as I
Yeah.
can, absolutely.
So what if we do a negotiation, agree at 100?
If you, I have a lot of time to spend, but not for 10 grand, Dan.
I think,
Like you.
I think the town meeting's gonna be really quick this year, so we might want to slip it in, you know? That's a very sarcastic remark, if you didn't know,
Yeah,
the agenda item. All right, are you okay, Dan?
well, I
Okay.
guess my point is, we're gonna round to a vote, right? So we need to decide between now and, 4 weeks from now, or whenever we do our voting, whether we want to, pull $20,000 out of this, stick to the $20,000 reduction, or go ahead with with 110, just to keep things moving along. I don't know. It's a tough call.
I like the latter.
Well, of course you do.
Yeah, because I'm gonna be up there.
Yeah. Well, plus you have to answer those people. We don't have to answer those people. We have to
That's
answer the
true.
town meeting, and town meeting says, give us a budget based on what you really think you're gonna spend. And 90,000 is probably what we're really gonna spend.
Steve, what happens if they don't use it all? in
If
this
they
budget?
don't use it, it would flow back to free cash at the end of the year.
Okay.
Yeah.
And-
And Kevin, how much has been returned free cash out of this budget for the last few years? I mean, a lot of money has come back.
Yes. But we did cut it from 70 to 110.
Right, so it's just not as big of a return. I get it. Anyway, something to figure out between now and,
Yeah, I
and
think-
4 weeks.
I think the point is, it
2
could be, it
weeks.
could be 2 weeks. We could be
Yeah.
voting next week, just so folks are aware. It could be.
Oh, could be, all right.
But you're right. I mean, there's this and there's a few other things that we need to consider. I completely agree with you, Dan, but, whether I'd recommend going to the floor on this, meaning, fighting over the 20 grand, we'll talk about that in a week and a half. I mean, you've planted the seed, I think, for all of us to think about.
Right.
Dennis.
Yep.
Dennis has his hand.
Dennis?
Yes, two questions. Who determines where the veterans agent resides at? Why is he in Melrose?
Veterans agent is at the senior center in Wakefield. We just are part of a district with Melrose, and that's where the district person covers Saugus, Melrose, and Wakefield.
Yeah,
But our
but,
veterans agent is at the senior center in Wakefield.
why does the person have to be in Melrose? Why of our three agreements is it chose to be Melrose?
That's the way, I guess, we set it up. They had a full-time person and we set it up that way. We have a dedicated person here that is here for time, and then the Melrose person comes here to handle times.
Is that like a director? Or?
That's a regional director. Desk is in Melrose, but comes to Wakefield.
Got it.
But that's where we're seeing the problem, that Melrose didn't have somebody, so this guy had to spend more time there.
Correct.
So why can't we make a proposition that he's housed in Wakefield instead of Melrose?
Because then Melrose would have nobody right now, and I don't think they'd agree to it. But if that person comes to Wakefield for the hours that they're supposed to, then we would have more than enough coverage. So we're gonna monitor that, Dennis.
Right, because you had a problem or
Right.
there was a little delinquency.
Yes, yeah.
Yeah.
But what penalty is there if he doesn't?
Well, then we're gonna tell them we're not gonna pay him. I guess.
Well, if we've been short forward so far, why are we continuing to pay him?
It's just brought to our attention.
Just, but can we say we're not gonna pay him for the rest of the year?
I'm not so sure I'd do that, but we'll have to talk to them. We're monitoring it.
Well, monitoring doesn't take money.
I don't have an answer for you, Dennis.
The second question would be, is if this stays with the town council budget, the budget that we see is your budget. What budget goes to the town meeting floor? Your budget or the amended budget from the town council?
The budget that goes to the floor is the town council voted budget
In the book.
in the book.
But also in the book is our recommendation.
No, absolutely. The column is there for our recommendation, yes.
Right, so you're gonna see two numbers. They're
Because
different.
The motion is on the town council budget, though.
Right. Again, the budget we're looking at was before the town council changed it. That's so everybody's clear, right? So that line item is 110 and not 90. And it's a plus 3,000 and change.
So I think our best way to do is go with Steve's budget as presented originally to us and let them justify the other 20 grand. That's my opinion.
Okay,
Okay, thank you.
thank you. Is Evan still there? I thought he had his hand up before Brian, but
He did, but he got out of line.
I did, but then Steve yelled at Dennis, and I was like, I don't want to be. Something like that. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding.
Starting to learn.
must be Thursday.
No, I just like in all seriousness, guys. I know we don't want to spend 2 hours on 20 grand, so maybe we can do it, more quickly. And I think you've covered it, but I know we don't want to spend 2 hours on it, but I think we're the finance committee. We should probably be making decisions based on financial merit and not how quickly we want to get out of town meeting. So, I just wanted to make that note. I think if it requires a conversation on the floor, it requires a conversation on the floor. Because if we act that way every time there's a $20,000 problem, it's going to add up quickly. So I just think it's worth addressing. Thanks.
Very good. Thank you. Brian?
So would it be fair to say that this $20,000 that we're talking about is largely ceremonial, in the sense that if it's needed, we're going to come up with the money and pay for whatever benefits are required? And so in a sense, it's really just, it's about appearances, is it not?
You're right, it's appearances, absolutely right, it's appearances.
For those of us watching the town council meeting the other night, you're 150%, 2,000%.
For the record, Bill watched the meetings.
I watched the meeting.
God love you, my man.
Yeah, I know, I'm sick.
Well, so I guess my point is that in the end, if we put it in there, it's fine. If it doesn't get spent, it comes back into the budget anyway. And I hear what you're saying, Dan, where, we should budget what we think is appropriate, not what we think is going to float well, publicly. I think they're both valid points, and I'm going to stop talking now. Thank you.
All right, very good. I think, like Evan said, things are worth discussing. We have our role. At the end of the day, we'll decide that likely when we vote in 2 weeks, but, good dialogue. There is no wrong answer. There is always a better answer or a closer answer to being right. Cover that together in a couple of weeks by all accounts. Is there anything else on the veterans budget? Okay. Thank you. Next budget, Medicare?
Next budget is the Medicare budget. We're requesting an increase of $68,864 over the current fiscal year. This budget is used to pay the town's portion of the Medicare tax, which is a salary-based tax for employees hired after 1986, at a tax rate of 1.45%. Total budget request for fiscal 25 is $1,030,195. I am projecting that we will probably need a small reserve fund transfer at the end of the year, maybe in the vicinity of $10,000.
For this fiscal year.
For this fiscal year.
It's payroll times 1.45, so it's just one of the payroll,
Right.
right? Okay, I didn't know if there was anything quirky
No.
other than that, okay.
So Kevin, you're projecting payroll increase of 7%, 0.16, so that's what you're projecting.
Right.
Yeah, okay.
Questions? Very good. That's really very straightforward. Group health insurance.
Group health insurance. We are requesting an increase of $204,144 over the current fiscal year. We have good news and bad news with regards to this budget. Bad news is healthcare costs are going up quite a bit next year. We're looking at about a 10% increase for next year. Good news is we're expecting to return approximately $1 million back from the current year's budget. And we are also looking to reduce, or we are reducing the OPEB line item that's in the budget from 1.4 million down to $1 million, where we just did a new valuation on our OPEB trust fund. And we are able to reduce it based on some good years that we've had, some good returns with that trust fund. So the tax levy portion of this budget is increasing $163,033. The transfers from the enterprise funds are increasing a total of $41,111. Under the personal services line item, there is an increase of $64,707, which includes contractual and negotiated increases. Also includes a new full-time position. We also did increase the enterprise offset to the salaries by $20,000 from $25,000 to $45,000. This budget also funds the town's OPEB trust fund, $1 million in fiscal '25. The current balance in the trust fund is $31.8 million. The total budget request for fiscal '25 is $15,917,161, with $13,455,094 coming from the tax levy, $505,336 from the water enterprise, $328,242 from the sewer enterprise, and $1,628,489 coming from the gas and light enterprise.
Very good.
Before we go to the subcommittee, I just want to say the town council has not voted on this budget yet.
Thank you.
It was presented to them Monday night. They tabled it. They wanted more information on the extra person, but we did have a subcommittee meeting, and I think Dan is gonna.
Yeah, I was gonna ask the subcommittee, and I spoke to Dan. Don's not here. I understand Don's retiring. Is that?
It's a retirement party, lucky guy.
Rumor I heard. Good for him.
Yep. Yeah, retirement party tonight for him.
Okay, Dan,
So-
you want to cover it, please? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. So we did meet last week. And we went through the big numbers substantially. I mean, we discussed a lot about the rate increases, what it means for, we figured out how many people are going to be in contracts. We discussed at great length how Kevin, Amy, and Karen developed their estimate of people coming in and going out of both the post-retirement as well as active healthcare. So we did spend like 45 minutes discussing the big numbers, and we got comfortable with that. Unfortunately, we did not discuss the new HR coordinator, which town council picked up on, and we just plain missed it. As simple as that. So Don and I discussed it, and Ellen as well, in terms of, okay, why are we adding an HR coordinator? And I went a little further and looked at our population. For many years in the retirement system, we've been hovering around 450 people. Does not include teachers, because teachers have their own retirement system, but we've been hovering around 450 people for a long time, either side of 10 people or so. But a year ago, we jumped to 276. And as of 12/31, we're at 496 active employees. So we've added roughly 50 people in the last few years.
The middle number was 476, right?
Yeah, 12/31/22 was 476.
Thank you.
And now it's 496, I think, 496 or 497. So we added another 20 people in the past year. And my concern is, and we'll get to it when we get to committee comments, is we are not covering our expenses with income. We're short this year by about $500,000, and it gets worse. Because one of the things that I asked Kevin about is, okay, we're getting $1 million back for 24, but for 25, it's going to be tight. We might get $300,000 or $400,000 back on this particular budget, not $1 million next year. So in my forecast, I cut the $1 million return on all budgets down to $500,000 on the forecast. Kevin and I thought that was probably a good, reasonable number. And, you know, with the veterans budget, we got 20 grand already coming in. So my issue is we didn't discuss this new person. We don't know how the person, why the person, and I'm looking at, you know, Steve, to please explain, why is it that we need an HR coordinator when we're over budget right now for 25?
Okay, Karen is on too from the office. So Karen, maybe you can jump on too, because I see you on here. But, you know, we have a department that handles human resources for the entire municipal side, handles payroll for the municipal and the school side, handles health insurance, workers' comp, 111F. And I have a department of 2 people doing that. Plus, they've done a great job of moving people over in the GIC from more expensive plans to less expensive plans. And that's almost done and has to be done on a one-on-one basis. Plus, they handle a lot of the retiree insurance questions, or all of the retiree insurance questions. So we haven't increased that department in 10 years. And the numbers have increased, like you said, on the, I guess, the retirement side, and probably all those people have insurance. So we need some help. We've got some people that are very, very, out straight. So I do think we do need help in that area. Poor Karen today, open enrollment is coming right now. And I think Karen spent most of the day stuffing envelopes, not doing, you know, this stuff that actually can save us money by moving people over when these things happen. So I think, you know, we talk about, we don't have a lot of people on the town side at all to start with. And I think this is an area where it will actually, I think, pay dividends, because if we get 1 or 2 people to move over, that's almost going to pay for itself, because these people are going to spend more time doing that. So to have this many plans, this many employees handled by 2 people is just, it's where we're really stretched to the limit, and other things that we could do to enhance. Plus all the HR stuff that's happening that they handle is, it's needed.
Yeah.
That's
Yeah.
why.
Yeah, I mean, I don't question, you know, that there's probably need, because we've gone from 450 to 500 people in the last few years. So yeah, they're going to be, you know, add a lot more work thrown on their plate, I guess. But looking broadly at it though, why are we at 500 people? That's, you know, that's a bigger question, because if we're back at 450, maybe we don't need this person to fill in for the other 50 people that we've picked up.
Well, I think it's bigger than that. Yeah. I haven't added 50 people.
I didn't point fingers.
I know you didn't.
So those numbers, Dan, where do I find those numbers of the cohorts? What groups those are all from, the total head count?
Oh, in the health insurance?
Well, no, the 496 employees.
The 496 is a number that's in the retirement board's annual statement of assets. It's page 11, I think, Kevin. I can break it down, but what I can't help you with is teachers. I can help you with, you know, by department over the last 20 years where we've been adding people. I mean, I can do that. But what I can't tell you is how many more teachers we have than we used to have. That's the only That's the only drawback.
Right, I mean, going the other way, don't we have an active employee database, for the town? You know, including teachers and not including teachers or whatever?
Yep.
All right, I might be interested to just look at that,
We can give them something at part, sure.
the head count.
Yeah.
Ed,
Yeah, I don't think it's purely numbers of employees, because I think the HR administrator will tell you that the demands on the HR side have really been intense with federal legislation, the FMLA.
I didn't even talk about that.
FLSA compliance. I was the personnel director early in my career, some 30 years ago. And the landscape has changed tremendously. And I understand 111F is part of this as
Yeah.
well. So the workload has increased tremendously. So I'm not sure it's just a function of the number of added employees here. So I think this proposal should be supported.
Yeah, Ed, I think you're right, because I've seen it too in my work. It is more than just the head count. I mean, it's both head count and amount of work involved with every person.
Yeah.
thank you. Bill?
So again, just because I watched the meeting the other night, I think, what they have been asked to come back and do is justify the head count with more of a data-driven explanation rather than the narrative, which is things we've asked for in the past as well. So I think that's the right way to approach adding headcount, is try to show some justification based on some data. So that's what they go, right, Steve? That's what you're charged to go back with.
Yep.
So,
All right, you'll provide that to us as well?
Yep. And a job description, which I don't think you have.
I don't think we have a job description. Thanks,
Well,
Bill.
you can also see it in the Medicare budget. I mean, that was going up over 7%. It's just not salary increases. A lot of it's salary increases, but it's also headcount.
Yeah. Dennis?
Can we just table this till we get what town council wants to do with this?
Well,
I don't,
yeah, we'll have that for our next meeting, I would expect.
Yeah.
no, I don't want to get into the same thing as we did with the veteran budget. Let them do their thing before it comes to us like it's supposed to. So I just assume table this until we get the select, town council's budget to us. Thank you.
Understood.
well, that's what we ultimately vote on anyway at the end. It's the budget that's
Correct.
approved by the town council for us to, when Joe runs through all the votes, that we're voting on a budget that's been approved by the town council, so we wouldn't see it before then anyway in an amended form.
Or we amend it.
Yeah, I mean, we're not making any judgments tonight to say yay or nay.
Right.
So,
I do think that this budget does tell a great story of many years ago when we were in, well, first we were self-insured, that was before my time. Then we were in Maya, and Maya's increases were horrible. Maya was Blue Cross Blue Shield through the state. We worked hard, we got into the GIC. Right off the bat, we decided that we would fund OPEB. And really, we're about paying, this budget on the health insurance side is basically the same as it was 10, 12 years ago. And we have 31 million in OPEB. So it's a pretty good story.
Absolutely.
there was it before your time, Steve?
No, self-insuring was before my time. There was a before my time, Bill. Yes. I know it doesn't look that way anymore, but.
One question I had was, so there's a potential to return about $1 million
This year. Yeah.
this year. I'm not looking to spend more money, but should we fund OPEB, the 1.4? Using some of that return money so that it grows on its own in the behind the scenes for a long time
I
to
think it's
come?
doing that, and we're gonna carry that million through anyway.
Yeah, I know you reassessed or whatever the term.
I mean, could we go to the fall? If we had a bunch of other,
Yeah, I mean,
I guess we could be open to that, but having OPEB fully funded by 2040 under this scenario, and having our pension fully funded by 2036, 37, whenever, That's pretty damn good. I think Dan
Yeah.
will tell you. Overall, it's really good.
That's really.
Yeah.
Okay, absolutely. Dan?
Yeah, I mean, exactly what I was gonna talk about is the OPEB funding. We did get a report. We did look at, if we continue the current path of roughly $1 million going to OPEB, we'll get fully funded. I think it's 2043. Correct me if I'm wrong, Kevin. But then we said, but wait a second, if we are fully funded in pension in 2036, we'll have a very large savings in 2037. And if we devote most of that savings to OPEB, how quickly we'll be fully funded. And the actuary came back and said, 2040, which is what you see in our minutes from the meeting. And that's something I've pushed for. And if we do make full funding on both pension and OPEB by 2040, we will be amongst a very small few in the Commonwealth that has accomplished that. It's a great story, and it really helps us with bond ratings and our borrowings and stuff like that. So we are on the right path in terms of pension and OPEB.
And when is pension fully funded? I was trying to write that down.
2036 is our last payment of the unfunded liability. So the end of 36.
And Dan, what is our OPEB liability now?
It's like 85 million. We're like 37% funded, something like that. 90 million, something in that neighborhood. Maybe Kevin.
Yeah,
I could-
it's in that ballpark.
Yeah, it's in that ballpark.
And the OPEB funding is a really big deal with the bond rating.
Oh, yeah.
That, and to maintain the AAA status, you want to stay on that.
Yeah. I've got one question, Kevin. I don't know, when the sheet, when you look at active employees, for the insurance enrollment, the plan numbers.
Yep.
When you look at the total on the left, it doesn't include all the columns. It doesn't include the town column and the school column when I click on it in the Excel spreadsheet. So the summary, and I could show you after the meeting, but the summary includes tax levy. Like the first line is, there's two people in the first line, for example. If the total on the right says one, just to give you an example.
Which one are you talking about?
Health, the plan numbers, it's tab 3 on the spreadsheet. So the plan numbers. Well, I don't know if there's a reason for that,
So
the
there's,
first two columns, excuse me, town and school, go ahead.
right, 0 for the town, 1 for the school, meaning 1 for the tax levy.
Okay.
So and then the total would be 1 in the far right.
Yeah, which is what it is. So,
Right.
so,
Column 1, column for the town, column for the school equals the column for the tax.
got it,
And then,
got it.
MLD water sewer.
right, so then, say the second row, it's 3 plus 25 equals 28. 28 plus 1 for the MLD equals to 29 on the far right. You see that?
I do. Yeah, so you're adding tax levy, which includes school and town.
Right.
And the rest of the enterprise.
Exactly.
Right, okay, got it, thanks.
Right.
Yeah,
So,
Yes.
Mr. Chairman,
yes, sir.
so while you're discussing that part, I went ahead and pulled up the OPEB report. And at the end of 23, we had $29.2 million. And our liability was 84.7 million. And I projected out, where that's going to go down the road, but those are the two key numbers as of June 30th, 23.
Yep. Ed?
I was looking at the health insurance premiums, the tax levy portion, town and school, was pretty surprised to see how much of the tax levy portion is school, which is roughly 71%, and the town 29%. And of course, the entire health insurance premiums are funded on the town side. That sometimes often gets forgotten in budget negotiations with the school department. And, good job here. I see Kevin, in hitting the enterprise funds and the light, gas and light district. Just curious if any, if we're taking any health insurance from any school grants coming back.
No.
maybe a question could be asked.
No, but we did recently send over a bill for the school lunch program, which did include health insurance costs.
Keeping on that revolving account,
Right.
charging revolving account for the entire cost. of it.
Yeah, and schools do get a lot of grant money
Yeah.
too, which sometimes you can assess, health insurance as part of the administrative costs.
Yeah.
Right, so the school's retirement is not part of the town, but the school.
Not for teachers, but for
Teachers,
paras and
But
others.
the non-teachers,
Yeah.
it is. And in the case of health insurance, it's all of the
Right.
people there.
The cafeteria workers would be in the retirement.
Right.
Yeah, with the cafeterias, custodians,
Paras.
paras, the staff,
I
the
think
administration.
administration is
Some admin.
some admin.
Okay.
And just two more quick questions,
Yep.
Kevin. I forget, what's the percentage split, employee versus town? The health?
It depends. It's either 80-20 or 75-25, depending on the programs.
75-25, maybe.
I think that's where the
Indemnity,
HMOs.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And do we have a breakout of how many individual versus family plans?
Yes. I have that, or do I have to have Karen get me that? Karen, I know Karen's on camera. Karen, are you still there? Family versus,
Yes, I'm
Yeah.
here. I'm trying to pull it up. One second.
thank you.
Do you have four choices or just two? You have like,
Just two. We have individual and family. That's
Yeah,
it.
that's how it is.
Yeah.
While she's pulling that up, I might also mention that we're increasing the amount of payout for the people who opt out of health insurance. Because the more people we get into the opt-out program, the cheaper it is. It's like, Karen could correct me, and it's like it's $19,000 per person. But an opt-out might be
For family
only
plan.
3,000 or 4,000. So we're increasing the payout for those that opt out of health insurance, which generates probably, maybe $14,000 or $15,000 savings for each individual. So we want to keep that going and enhance that a little bit. So that's part of the budget here too.
Yep, and that was in the minutes. Don captured some of that as well, Dan, so thank you.
Yeah.
Yep.
Which is another item that our staff spends a lot of time talking to people about, and it saves us money.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Karen, did you find anything?
I did. So the individuals is 997, but that does include the Medicare supplements. So let me just take those out. So we have 284 individuals. We have 713 Medicare plans. And 414 family plans.
Thank you.
Very good. So, I know in the open market, you can offer an employee and spouse or an employee and child, and that's cheaper than a family plan. But the GIC doesn't offer that?
I think GIC is just individual or family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because I know that started, in more recent history, I think. But it is a little cheaper, on the cost base.
Right.
So,
It is, but
yeah.
we did look at it years ago because I have been around long enough that I was with us when we were self-funded.
yes.
Nightmares of those days. And we looked into, and what would happen is your family rates would go up, which is probably why the GIC has not done it.
Yep.
Right. Yeah, Karen, I was going to say the same thing. That's been my experience when a client would add that, employee plus one. What happens, the family coverage went up just to make up for the difference, and you end up in the same spot.
Exactly.
Thank you. I just have one other comment, really. There's no other questions, right? It's more of a Doug Butler approach to things.
Oh, no.
Sorry, I can't resist. When it comes to opting out, if your program wasn't as good as the spouse's program, they opt themselves out and go somewhere other than the town. So my point to that is the GIC is a decent program and you know, some people are gonna opt out anyway because their wife or husband or significant other has a better plan. Now, I'm not professing that I know the math on that, but when you offer a plan that's in the middle of the pack, you're gonna get some percentage of people that'll find a better plan somewhere else. I'm not saying to change anything. It's just how Doug might look at it, and I thought that might be entertaining for you all to hear that. But
There's one thing on this budget that is a concern is the unenrolled.
Yeah.
That there are people that are not on, they haven't opted out, they're not on the town's insurance. I think that total was,
27%.
27%, I think is like 200 and something,
Yeah.
240 people.
We are concerned about particularly, well, people that may be on their spouse's plan right now, and they may want to come in because who knows, any qualifying event
yeah,
that happens. There are also a number of the new hirees and I think this last year, Dan and I went back and forth on the ages, but it seems like this last year, there's a lot of young kids have been hired in both, public safety and including DPW, and they're in that 24, 25, not new FTEs, but replacing people that are still on their parents' plan under the Affordable Care Act. So someday they're going to come here, and I think that's going to be, every community is going to face that.
sure.
So that's something that we are, it's a contingent liability out there that we're aware of.
If you're going through a turnover at various age levels, that it's, yeah.
But with this budget here, we did include 25 additional
Plans, just in case.
Just in
Yeah,
case to cover.
as in forecasted.
Right.
Yep. Right. Anything else?
All set with this.
Thank you, Karen.
Thank you, Karen. Have a good night.
You too.
Thank you, Karen.
All right, last budget is cable vision.
The cable public access enterprise, we are recommending an increase to this budget of $340 over the current fiscal year. This budget is funded from the receipts from our cable providers, which we have three. We have Verizon, Comcast, and RCN, per our agreements with these individuals, to fund our public, educational, and governmental cable TV access. This budget is based on both prior and current year revenue estimates and is apportioned by the town's cable agreements. Revenues have been trending down. They seem to level off a little bit this year, possibly due to the additional construction here in Wakefield. We may be picking up additional subscribers. Personal services for fiscal 25, the amount is $148,521. This is used for salaries at the Wakefield High School for 2 teachers in the media department. Under contractual services, the amount of $348,195 is used for payments to WCAT, which is a 503C, which was set up to provide cable access for the town. Capital revenue is at $62,500 and is split 1/3 to the Wakefield Public Schools and 2/3 to WCAT based on the number of channels each of them support. Total budget request for fiscal 25 is $559,216.
Good question. No questions. Excellent. The next item, I think, would be capital planning. We have someone on for capital planning, is that right?
I think the liaison is Joe Bertrand and Phil Renzi is the chair of the capital planning committee. And Joe Conway, the DPW director, is also on.
Nothing from you, Kevin, correct? Or... So, you want to hear from liaison first?
Sure.
Thank you.
The subcommittee with myself and Lori Will, we met with the cable planning committee a week and a half ago. At that time, they had pared the request down from $9 million down to 2.235. And after a 2-hour meeting, Very spirited discussion, we were able to get it down to 2,000,000, like 51,000, I think the final number was. And to give you more of the details, Phil Renzi, who's the chairman of the Capital Planning Committee, will do so.
Good evening. Has the finance committee seen the final approved list?
Yes, we have. Yeah,
Okay.
we received the list and a copy of your presentation, so go right ahead though, please.
Great. Do you want me to go through the presentation then?
Sure.
Or just touch upon, so there are 5 committee members as myself, Dan Calori, Tracy Cleversey, Frank Conti, Sam Hockenberry. We meet throughout the months of February and March. As Joe mentioned, we started off with about $9 million in asks. We've pared that down to a little over 2 million. We've met with all the departments that were requesting: school department, fire department, police department, library, and fire alarms. They come in and they basically, set some priorities and tiers to their asks. We ask some questions, and then we use that information as sort of our back and forth. Some of the approvals this year include 3 vehicles for the police department, which is a historical approval. This year, we pared down their initial request from the initial 245 to 170. And that was done instead of getting 3 patrol cars. It's 2 patrol and 1 detective vehicle, because a detective vehicle is a little cheaper, doesn't need to be outfitted as much. DPW, a big ask. One of the big items there was a dump truck with the snowplow to replace an older one. And then the fire department replacing a 1980 whaler boat with a new fire rescue boat. That was one of their priority asks. And then for buildings, town hall, the building you're in right now, the elevator needs to be modernized. It's risk of being basically shut off by the state due to problems. And so that was a big ticket item, but it's a modernization of the equipment. The garage door safety interlocks at the fire department, that prevent when like a pumper truck is backing into the garage, that the door doesn't close on it. That's actually happened because these doors don't have these safety edges on them. And so we approved the safety edges for that. And then a new roof on the Forest Glade Cemetery building was approved. And then other like basic town approvals was a new traffic light detection system at the corner of North Ave and Prospect. That was one of the asks from the alarm department. And then on a town-wide basis, a new time and attendance software is a big ask, but we felt very important for the town to get modernized and all in the same system. And then crack sealing and resurfacing of the tennis courts. And then there's a whole list. I'm not going to go through every line item, but those are just some of some of the items we approved. And again, the final tax levy approved that we voted on was 2,051,816. And then there was the water enterprise that we approved 254,000, and then the sewer enterprise of 390,000. And I can answer any questions about any of the items on the list or anything the committee might have.
Very good, thank you. Bill?
So the $200,000 for the software is, I think, a pretty substantial ask. Could you explain more what that is, what department it touches? Is it software that you've selected a vendor, or are you going out for a vendor selection process? Can you give some more background on that? I think the other things are pretty self-explanatory to most of us, but that I don't understand at all.
Joe Conway, you want to take this one?
Yeah, I got you. Hey, Bill.
Hey, Joe.
So, that is something that came up. We found out during the year that there are a bunch of different town departments kind of sitting in the same spot related to what they're using to perform attendance tracking and things like that. I know my group in the school department both use a company that's getting acquired. And one of the pain points to doing the payroll I'll speak for myself, for the 80 people that we have, is we rely on a third-party system to bridge data into Munis, which does the payroll for the town. After a couple of presentations and vetting some of, different vendors, Munis actually makes exactly what we're looking for. It's the same language, it's the same formatting as what our checks and payroll has to get transferred into anyway. So the ask is for essentially my group, the school department, the fire department, everybody at town hall, and I believe there's a piece to the police department that's also going to be using this. So everybody will be on the same thing. Everybody will learn one platform. There'll be plenty of redundancy, things like that.
Very good.
But,
Ted, you had a
well,
comment?
I have another question. So,
Yes, Billy.
is it, license based or, what is it? Is it user based? Is it something that, you could come back to us and say, we've got 15 more users next year? By the way, I appreciate you doing this. I would really like to see somebody from IT speaking to this, but, I appreciate that you are being the spokesman for it, but what's the 200,000? What is it?
So
User
it's-
based or?
I believe you own it in perpetuity. But I
Well,
believe
there's gotta be maintenance associated with it.
there is. So the other part is to it is the actual componentry itself. So I know, like in my group, I have 7 time clocks throughout all the different buildings that we work in.
Okay, so there's hardware in this number.
Correct, yes. So there'll be some like the school custodial employees, like each building will have to be wired up, with essentially a punch clock for them. It'll also be an interactive interface too, where they can access some of their accruals, request time off and things like that, and it'll all be kind of boxed up into one platform instead of using 2 different things in parallel.
Who rolls it out? Does the IT department roll it out? I mean, who does the training? Does the vendor do the training? Is that part of the $200,000 or do you have
It's
do you have a rollout plan? Department by department?
I'm not privy to that. I know IT is working on that with the vendor. We have somebody on staff in IT that kind of Munis is their thing. That's what they specialize in. So they're kind of going hand in hand on what that rollout is going to look like.
Mhm.
But I would imagine, there's going to be multiple sit downs and user trainings and things like that to make sure everybody's up to speed and understands it before it's completely rolled out.
Okay, thank you.
All right, Bill?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah.
Ted, you had a comment?
Yeah, Bill asked my questions, basically, just to follow up, Joe. This software will track vacation and sick time accrual as well?
Everything. So selfishly, I'll give you an example. So at least for what I'm running and what the school department runs, because we have the same program, somebody from my group needs to manually enter the accruals. And every once in a while, those 2 lists don't match up. So it require us to go back in and actually make corrections and audit them. So everything will be done throughout the payroll component or like the master hub data set. So it'll all be the same. So
Right, you're singing my song on this. So this affects not only, well, it's not just the IT, but the human resource department, but also the town accountant as well, because the town accountant has to report in the annual audit compensated absence liabilities. So that's going to help him as well as giving you some accountability, department heads some accountability.
Correct.
I think it's a very important feature. Yeah.
The other thing this thing will do is, depending on the little nuances that each collective bargaining group has, the ability to pre-program different payroll rules and changes through this is much more advanced and actually easier to use than what we're presently doing now. So sometimes you have to actually hand calc something and add it in as an edit. This will be essentially automation.
Yeah, thank you. Laurie?
2 separate things. So I did sit in on the capital planning the meeting they had to go over thing. I really appreciated their dialogue. One of the concepts that came up that I thought was interesting is related to basically you've got 2 systems here, the time and attendance system software ask, and you have a work order system ask. And there was certain debate about whether to pay up front or lease. And I don't have an answer or a recommendation, but I think it was interesting, the dialogue around it, like what pushes that forward? Like does Steve do for you, for example, get involved and provide them with any guidance?
Well, I think Joe will bring it to me with the overall picture of what they're doing, right?
So
For everything,
So,
yeah.
okay, because for example, like one system they were talking about paying for upfront and the other one they were leasing, but in terms of negotiating terms and figuring out what's best for the town overall, I think it would be good from an umbrella perspective. Not that you need to set a policy, but it as on a one by one. So you do look at that.
Yeah, Joe brings them to me, yeah.
What's more beneficial. Okay.
Because I would love to say we had enough to do like the work order system, another 350, but we just can't fill that in. We can't include the whole 350 this year.
Right.
That, yeah.
I'm not saying there's a right or wrong
Yeah.
answer. I just think that sometimes it might be more beneficial to lease and sometimes
Yeah.
it might be more beneficial to buy. And then
Right.
there's back end costs. But like, I do think that you need like a global perspective, like in terms of looking at it for the whole town and what makes the most sense across the board.
That's what we do. We really try to keep the leases at bay and we look at them where they're going to be going forward.
Okay.
We'll pull them out because we used to have tons of leases before and
Yes.
we couldn't when we were really bad.
And I
you know,
appreciated
financially.
the capital
Yeah.
planning's dialogue
Yeah.
around it, but it just, there was no right answer in my
Right.
head and I wanted somebody to make sure that we were looking at that.
Yeah.
And then lastly for Joe, have you demoed this software, Joe Conway, the Munis system, or is IT doing the demos? Or have you not gotten that far?
No, believe it or not, at town hall, we use a piece of it right now. We use a very small piece of it.
But
So
You're
in
pretty
it.
far into it.
Yeah, I mean, our toe, we're a little bit further than our toe dipped in the water.
Yeah.
You know, we went to it because again, anything that we're doing third party transfers into this anyway. You know, and then we've seen more of the expansive demos and things like that, and they've been great about, you know, getting any information or questions that we had answered. So we're very comfortable, I think, across the board, my group and town-wide, with what this can do and how it can ease some of the, you know, little pain points. Probably isn't the greatest word to describe it, but you know, the little things that could be more efficient, I guess is the better way to say that.
Thank you.
Great. Dan?
Yeah, thanks. So I'm looking at the spreadsheet and I did just put a new column in that showed the difference between the estimated amount and the recommended amount. And a lot of it is self-explanatory as to why there's a difference, but some, I'm just looking for some clarification. And I'll start with the very first item, the DPW equipment 1140 fleet section, first line. The difference between the estimated amount and recommended is 13,500, but the notes say it's 6,500 in trade-in value. So I'm just wondering, how do we get from 125 to 111? I mean, I guess this is probably a Joe question.
Yeah. So generally, with the state, especially in the automotive end, with the state of kind of that whole industry, the first set of quotes that we get around November, they're not sure about the next year's allotments, and they tend to be more conservative. So the dealers will give us something that's a little bit more, and the upfitters will give us something a little bit more conservative, so that they don't box themselves into a number that they're not going to be able to hit. So as time goes on and this list gets pared down and it becomes more probable than not that we're actually going to replace this vehicle, we'll go back to them, tell them to sharpen their pencils. We'll ask them, you know, for trade values. If we don't like the trade value, we go to multiple vendors and kind of pair them against each other to compete on it. So it kind of starts, I guess it's easier for them, you know, and anybody really, to work backwards than it is to work up, because they shot too low and were too aggressive too fast. So that's generally what causes that.
Okay, so and I assume that's true of the rubbish truck, because that's a $60,000 difference. I mean, that's huge.
So we actually started with we started with vendor A. We got a price. That was the 225 that we used. We ended up talking to probably 3 or 4 different ones, you know, all looking for basically the same thing. And we were able to solicit much better pricing from another vendor. So that's what we chose, and that's what we're moving forward with.
Excellent. And then let's see. I think that was all. Yeah, the rest of the questions were really, you went for a much smaller amount because we did a lease purchase, and that accounted for the differences. Okay, great. And then of course with the difference on the detective car versus the 2 cruisers, that saved 75,000, I see in your estimate. So, okay, good, well done, thank you. I'm all set.
Thank you. Just my question, the rubbish truck, so is that for city trash? What's a rubbish truck used for?
So that one, we have an 11-yard rubbish truck that does downtown every weekend. And at least 3 times a week, it does all the parks and schools. Anytime we have any function on the common, or actually really anything related to it, that goes with us wherever we go. It doesn't do, door-to-door collection or anything like that. That thing's out about 4 days a week, picking up all those green barrels you see at the parks, and things like that.
Thank you. Bill?
Yeah, just one last question for me. Is there a specific threshold at which you solicit bids? So let's take an example, the fireboat, 75,000, 75,000. Does that mean you've already spec'd it with a specific vendor and that's what you expect to get?
So that's the scenario that the fire department, that request actually didn't come from my group, but yes. So anything here. So when this whole process starts, my function in this, I'm really the scribe of the group. And then if the committee has any questions or anything like that they want to ask any of the departments, I'll do that, outside of the meeting so the meeting can stay productive and on point. They all get the same
Maybe that's a question for Steve then. Steve?
Yeah, I would expect that the fire chief got the quotes, but I'll check on that.
I mean, I'm
They
not
do a pretty good
picking on
job.
that one in particular, but
No,
there
no,
are
I know. Yep.
multiple things there. I
Yep.
mean, Joe, you specifically mentioned that, you went out, which of course, I would expect anybody to do, go out and solicit multiple quotes for the vehicles and things like that. And if you couldn't get what you needed and you had to sole source it, then you would say, well, you'd sole source it. But I just, wonder if there is I've never asked this before. I don't know why. Is there a specific threshold for which bids have to be solicited?
Generally on the vehicle.
30B.
Yeah, so Massachusetts procurement law dictates the thresholds for that. Generally on the vehicles, a lot of the people that we interact with are on state
State
contract
business.
anyway.
If you, yeah, it's not a state contract.
Yeah.
Very good. Stefan?
Yeah, so in the PowerPoint, there was mentioned that you had started at a $9 million total capital outlay request. How much of that is at some point in time mandatory must-haves versus nice to haves? Like, I guess what is our exposure for the future for capital?
I'd say
I'll
every
take
year.
I'll take some of this too. I'll take some
Yeah,
of
I'd
this
say
too.
every year we always get a few requests that come in. Like this year, there was a fire department pumper for over $1 million. There was a new fuel depot for DPW at a couple million. So we usually get a few line items every year that add up to big money that usually get pushed off to warrant article or pushed some other way. In terms of the other items, like the school department has a lot of lists. We have them prioritize the must-haves as ones, and we try to focus on those if possible. We rely on their input into them telling us it's a must-have, because obviously we don't know every building. So we cut, like we probably we got an easy cut. I think I say easy from 9 to probably what a little over 3. Joe, would you say? I think in a first cut of like tier 3 or low price or really low, like, $7,000, $5,000 items that we thought would really fit better in just someone's operating budget. So, and then it was really that last million plus that really was the tough, like what I think are must-haves. Now, what happened to those asks after we take them off the list? Sometimes we'll see them the next year and we'll remember them. Sometimes we'll never see them again, and I honestly don't know what happens to them. I've been on the committee for 8 years, and so there's been a number of items that come up year to year, and we'll eventually, like the prisoner transport van was one for the police. We finally approved it, but then other things come in the way. I don't know what happens to those items that are must-haves that get thrown off the list, and we don't see them again, in all honesty.
Yeah, I was gonna jump in if I can, Mr. Chairman. On the, I think down the road, you are gonna see a new pumper, probably 5 years or so. New ladder truck, probably 7 years or so. And those big items are $1 million, $1.5 million. They probably take a year to build now. And we'll do those probably through a warrant article, which we have in the past, and probably bond them that way, because if you plop that into this capital, it would eat up $1 million item that, let's say that we did it all in purchase, they'd eat up half the capital for the year, basically. So we've gone those, and we've gone to town meeting with those warrant articles before.
Yeah, I think the fire chief said the pumpers are closing in on 2.5 years in delivery
Yeah.
nowadays. Yeah.
I thought at some point we would see like a 5-year forecast for capital.
I think Joe has that.
Is that something?
Yep, I have what we did last year. So when this process completes, we'll take it and update it, and then probably after tonight, we'll do that again. So I can get that out to the group. That's
Yeah,
no-
if you send that to me, I'll get it to the group or vice versa, or we'll share that. So I knew we had something in the, whether I started the PPW book or wherever it used to be. Thank you. Anybody else?
Yeah, one thing, Mr. Chairman.
Sure.
Yeah, I'd just like to point out that last year we were at 2.2 million for the capital planning. We have gone down, and that's not the best way to go. The best way to go is to go up. It was forecast to be 2.3, so we're 300,000 short here for this year's budget. This should not happen again, because we don't want to run into, where we, a few years ago, where we cut $1 million from that. We got to keep the forecasted increase for capital planning, especially and especially next year, get back to the 2.3 at least. Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Well, thank you, Joe. Appreciate it. I think that
Thank you.
covers the items, correct? All right, approval of minutes. Start with the finance committee meeting minutes from 3/14, our last meeting. So you should have in the packet on Govenda, the minutes from the March 14th meeting.
Move to accept.
Thank you. Bill, second.
Second.
Dan, thank you. Any discussion on the minutes for March 14th? Seeing none, all those in favor of the minutes for March 14th for the full committee?
Aye.
Anyone opposed? Thank you. Then the other minutes was from the Health Insurance Subcommittee minutes. Those were from March 21, 2024, and that is Dawn and Ellie and Dan, I believe.
Yep. I'll move approval.
Second.
Thank you, Dan, Ellie. Any discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Thank you. Approved. Committee comments. My only comment is in the packet, the total budgets to date, the summary page, I don't know, I found it, I saved it, and then I couldn't find it again in Govenda, but I think I found it later. But 4.38 for the grand total to date for increase year over year. There's a couple of budgets that are tabled right now, right? There were two of them still, I think. Was the town council budget?
They haven't been presented yet. They'll be done Monday, April 8th.
And then the other one that we spoke of tonight. And the only real exposure to that for contract negotiations is clerical. Is there a second?
Clerical, yep.
Just clerical.
It's clerical.
Right, so that,
Library, clerical and library.
and that exposure is not $1 million.
No.
It's no, right. Right, so total
And I think Dan has accounted for something in his forecast on those,
okay.
at least in library.
Dan, do you have a comment on that?
Well, I was just gonna say, if I can receive the rights or ability to show my screen, I can walk through the current forecast and what we're looking at for numbers and shortfall and surplus and so forth.
Okay. I can show it, or he can show it if you got it. Yep. Next meeting is Thursday, the 11th. Dan, you should be able to share. Thursday, the 11th. There's a good chance we'll be voting on budgets that night. So consider that and be prepared.
Any way we could do a 6? Does that work for people?
I'll bring that up again at the
Yeah.
end. Go ahead, Dan.
Might be a lot.
All right, hopefully, let me make it a little bit bigger.
There you go. We can see it.
You can
That's
see
good.
it? Oh, good.
Yep. I can see it, sorry.
Hopefully,
My
everybody else
glasses
can.
on. Go ahead.
So I've got our 25 budgets in that we've got so far. I included the schools at their preliminary 5.5% increase. There's a Volk budget, which I don't have. I've got just the Northeast, but we also have Lexington, Minuteman, and Essex. I think those are the 3 budgets that are left for next 2 weeks. So I've included everything that we know at this point. So in terms of departments, we're at 111.7 million. Other costs brings us up to 122.1 million. And I've included the transfers that go to, water, sewer, and so forth. That pulls 4.5 million from the tax levy for a total of 117,581 in terms of costs. And you can see how it goes up to the right. And note that it is an increase of 4.7% year over year, 24 to 25. And our 3-year or 5-year running is at 4.2% increase for cost. On income side, we've got the latest numbers, and this is subject to change for 13,891 from the state. My number for local receipts, which is significantly greater than Kevin's. We get light department available funds, tax levy increase. I'm using 1.4 million for new growth. I think that's consistent with what Kevin and Steve have. So we're looking at 117,290 on the income side, increase of 4.4%, and right now a $300,000 shortfall. Note that it grows in the future because of what I talked about on the healthcare side, where I used to have $1 million rolling back in, which is here. So $1 million change just because budgets come in, or the actual expenditures versus budgets bring back about $1 million. Most of that, almost all of that will be healthcare plus some other stuff. But then I reduce it down to 500,000 for the rest of the period because of the increase in healthcare costs we talked about earlier. So what that does up here is create roughly $1 million deficit for the foreseeable future, which translates in, of course, in terms of free cash. Right now, the forecast is 9.6 million at the end of 24, and then it decreases with time because we're deficit funding for the foreseeable future based on numbers and what we know today. So, I mean, we're going to be okay for 25, but obviously the concern is for 26 and beyond, going in the wrong direction on free cash and our reserves. I think I have the reserves here. Yeah. So our reserves, I'm forecasting at the end of fiscal year 24 at 11.4%, which is a little above our policy guideline of roughly 10%. But because of deficit funding, it decreases to 10 years out down to 6.2%. And also, I'd mentioned on Joe's point on capital, I think I'll find my capital budget. Here's capital. So for 22, we're roughly at 2,000,021, and then now we're dropping down to 205. I've just got general inflation going forward, and I think I've got a 4% number. going forward on maybe 3% increases on capital. And I'm going to echo what Joe said. My concern is we need to stay on top of capital. We don't want to be where we were back in 2009 with a $300,000 budget. That's just not acceptable to my mind. So that's where we stand today. We're looking at a deficit about 291, and we'll see what happens with Essex Tech and Lexington when we get those numbers.
That's a good question. Very good, thanks, Dan. Questions?
Dan, could you just move up? I'm curious on the new growth
Yeah,
projection for that, given all the development in town. What do we have?
right. So yeah, so for this year, we've Victor's given us this $2.481 million figure, but the 1.4 is what Kevin, Steve, and I came up with, and it might be too low. If all the building and so forth, maybe it is 2 million. It'd be great if it was, because then a lot of these deficits, might get cut in half if it was, a $2 million new growth rather than $1.4 million.
Right, it's an important component going forward because that raises your levy base.
Yep.
So. Stefan?
Dan, yeah, I just wanted to ask about the tax levy calculation. How is that calculated year over year?
So what happens is, for example, this $90 million I've got here is taking last year's new growth, or actually in my example, this is the current fiscal year, taking the 86 million plus the 2.5 million, add those together, increase it 2.5, because that's the Prop 2.5, from 1979, as the limit. But then what you get to do is, going forward, is new growth is added to that figure, so that in total it grows by more than 2.5% just because of new growth.
Very important.
Right, and we increase our taxes to that max 2.5% every year.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, sometimes town council will make it 2% or 2.3 or something like that. They have the ability, and what that does, if it doesn't do 2.5, that's excess levy that we can tap at a later point in time.
Correct. And they only do that if the reserves are have reached 10%.
Okay, so that's the threshold. As long as the reserves are at
There's a number of them, but that's one of them. Yeah.
Yeah,
Okay.
and that's just a policy. There's no rule
Right.
regarding what they do. The next town council could say, no, we're still going to do 2.5, even if we have 11% reserve. It's just a year-to-year decision.
Okay, and I'm just curious too, like how much of a reserve of that max 2.5% increase have we accumulated over the years? Because I think that give back or reduction in tax rate letter is I think I see that every year. I think I've seen that every year since I've lived there, actually.
Yeah, is it 600,000 now? How much is it up to? Our excess levy, Steve, do you know?
300 or so, 268 is in my mind, but I don't know why.
Is that where we took some money from last year?
No. We just didn't tax to the max. But you can always go back and get it.
You don't lose it.
Yeah, you don't lose it. Yeah.
So 300,000.
300 is a good article. But I think if your question was, Stefan, I think we've probably done not gone the full 2.5, and I mean it's like 2 1/8 or 2 1/4. It's pretty close, or 2 3/8. Probably 8 out of the last 17 years.
Have or have not?
Have not.
Is there additional, like, because we're not going to the max every year, because now we're talking about compounded interest that essentially that the town is not realizing. Is the excess that you're speaking of, that 300K or so, is that taking into account that compound factor?
Yes. No, not the interest we might lose on it. I think that's what it means.
No, I guess what I mean is, say for instance, I have like $1 million property, And you're only increased the tax value of that by 2%. So you essentially you pocket for for a rainy day the 0.5%. But every year you're increasing that by 2%. You keep pocketing the difference. But at the end of the day, when you go to, I guess, capitalize on whatever reserve you have, you're doing it on a suppressed basis, right? Am I
I think you're,
calculating? Am I thinking of this correctly?
I think you're right. I think you're right, Steph. I don't think there's any interest on what we leave behind.
It's not compounding.
No,
To
no.
terms.
Yeah, so the figures that you're talking about are absolute. They're not compound. And I think, I don't know, it seems to me that at least what this forecast is showing is that we have bills due coming up. And we don't seem to be taxing to the greatest extent that we really can, and I think probably should, prudently.
Yeah, if I change the formula, instead of being 2.5% to something less than that, all these numbers, these deficits would just get that much larger.
But that's a decision that the town council makes with the assessor, is that right? Through you?
Yeah. Well, yes,
It's set.
when it's setting the tax rate, yeah.
Budget.
Yeah.
Well, I guess it's the town council's ultimate decision. It's, I don't know, maybe it's a political decision to do that.
Right,
As
but
long
there
as
are
they
some,
hit the
right.
financial metrics that we've got in place.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, I guess, yeah, how does the assessor feel about this?
I don't think it matters to him.
Yeah, I don't think it
Yeah,
matters.
That's not.
yeah.
No.
Oh,
No.
you know, Stefan, you raise a really good point, is that I'm assuming every year that it's going to be 2.5%. And if Steve, if you're right, that in our history has been, on average, it's 2.4, say over the last 10 years, maybe I should be using 2.4 instead of 2.5 in this forecast.
Well, or you just update previous year as actual.
Oh, I do that, but I'm thinking about, but
And we're going forward.
But going forward, I probably shouldn't, but every time there's a new change and, new town council, you don't know what they're gonna do. They could say, let's
Right.
keep it at 2.5, or they could say, lower it.
Well, I mean,
Another way I could do this, though, is I could set this up to be a dynamic formula wherein if that reserve is at 10% or higher, that I knock it off to 2.4 instead of 2.5.
Yeah, that's not the only factor. The factor is, are we fully funding OPEB and pension obligations, the ARC? So there's a number of things in there, plus the 10%. So I'll send you the policy, Dan, and you can take a look at it and see if you want to play around.
Yeah, I might just do exactly that. Is just adjust the spreadsheet to factor in the reserve and the OPEB and retirement, and see what that does to the numbers.
All right. Stefan, is your hand up or down?
Yeah, sorry, I had one last question too. I know, I think later this year, we're gonna be voting, or no, soon, we're gonna be voting on the MBTA overlay district.
Yes.
The town meeting.
Is there, I guess, is there any indication that there's gonna be like an explosion of growth associated with that?
I personally don't believe there will be, but I think people have their own opinions on that. It only would allow up to a 4-family in an area that is mainly general residence. So you could already have 2 families. I don't think it's going to amount to very many more units at all.
Okay.
Personally.
Thank you.
Evan.
Yeah, I don't know if I just was gonna chime in. I on Stefan's question. I don't know if you were asking about compounding and interest. I wasn't sure if you were asking about sort of the definition of excess levy and whether or not, like, if your house is valued at $1 million it's sort of like, that's not how the excess levy capacity is calculated. The excess levy capacity is just the difference between your actual levy and your levy limit. Your levy limit still goes up 2.5% plus new growth every year. And what you actually raise from taxes, excuse me, is your levy. So like, I don't know, I just, we sort of moved on from that, but I wanted to touch on that because it's almost cumulative in nature. Like, you always have the option to go to the levy limit. So if you're leaving, let's say you're leaving 100 grand on the table year over year, it's kind of like it's almost like that adds up. And then all of a sudden in 1 year, if you decide to go to the levy limit, you're really actually taxing more than 2.5%. So I just wanted to sort of weigh in on that.
Thank you for that clarification, Evan.
Helpful, thank you.
Yeah, and for some reason, I thought that that levy limit versus what our actual levy is more than $300,000. I thought that we did it a few times and it's accumulated to a larger amount than the 300,000.
Yeah, I don't think it has. Go back.
No, over a course of years, if you look at what we left on the table, each individual year, it was millions of dollars. But for any particular year, it was a small amount, but then, you go back and recapture it.
Yeah,
Good. It's actually not a bad look to have a little bit of excess levy capacity in the eyes of the bond rating agencies in the event that you have some major catastrophe or whatnot. They want to see that you have a little bit of capacity to deal with it. So I know I always try to leave a little on the table. For that reason.
Yeah. So Kevin, do you have an idea what the accumulated value of everything we've left on the table over the years might be? What's the total?
For this past recap that we did, I think it was like 300,000.
But for every year.
But for every year, for the last 10 years, I think I gave you a sheet that was.
We can send that to you, Dan, because it has been recaptured, but you're right. If we had it all, it would be somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's what I thought. Because I thought it was like 300,000 was only 1 year. We've done this multiple times. So the accumulated gap, if you will, is, it's got to be over $1 million.
Kind of like you didn't get it this year, but then next year you came back and got it, but you still lost it in year one.
Right.
And then,
Oh, yeah. No, I get that part. Yeah.
But Kevin, am I correct? Am I correct that in any given year? Because I think of it cumulatively, but it's really not a cumulative calculation. It's in any given year, your excess levy capacity is the difference between your actual levy and the levy limit, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Okay. So if 1 year you don't have it, it means you tax to the levy limit. So it's not cumulative. It's not like if we left 300 grand on the table, it doesn't add up to. We can calculate it this way, but it's not like we left $3 million on the table over 10 years. We're at the levy limit. We're at the levy limit. There's no more excess levy. Okay.
Unless you're Cambridge and you kept leaving it.
I hope not.
Oh, yeah. I get the money. All right. So Dan, you'll look at that, but I don't think the 2.5 is wrong, but you'll take a look at it.
Yeah.
I think this forecast is very, very helpful. And it seems like we seem to come in a little better than this forecast. So if you make it more pessimistic and we come in better again, then it might just dilute my observation of it, I guess, but that my thought.
Yeah. And remember, one of the things, I'm on the local receipts, my number is like 9.7 million. And I know Kevin's is, 8 or something, 7 million.
Kevin's is 5.5.
Oh, it's not that bad. But that difference is just going to get pulled from free cash.
Right.
Yep. All set?
I'm good unless anybody else has questions.
All right, thank you. Good discussion. Next meeting is the April 11th. We're gonna have schools, vocational schools, warrant articles, and then likely try to vote. So Steve has asked about possibly starting earlier. So could people do 6 o'clock if the majority agreed on that? I see one guy in the middle shaking his head no.
What do you think?
I can't, I talked about.
Yeah, you're tied up. So,
At least till 7.
all right,
So
6:30?
why do we need to start at 6?
Because it goes till 10 PM.
I think it might be a long night.
Just, yeah. Worried about the duration, really.
Yeah, and I have my feety pajamas on at 8:30 most nights. Come on. But if it's gotta be 7, that's fine. Whatever works for people.
I'll put an email out in, what I don't want to do is, have 6 people tell me they can't
Yeah.
make it, all right?
Right.
I'll put an email out, let me know if you can make it or not, and, I'll keep you posted.
Do we
I
have,
will, I'll be remote that particular meeting, but, I'll be here, so, sorry, somebody spoke?
yes, Dennis, do we have to wrap it all up in the next meeting, or can we just?
No,
I think we do because we gotta get the book ready for town meeting. It's gotta be put together.
yeah, I mean, the only other thing we do is hold a meeting a week later, but
Yeah,
I
that's possible.
don't know when your deadline is, I didn't ask you
Yeah.
that, but.
When's town meeting?
April 29th.
It's back to Mondays. Monday, Thursday, and the next Monday is my projection. So. All right, group. Entertain a motion to adjourn.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, nice work, thank you. Second,
Second.
all those in favor?
Aye.
All right.
Thank you, appreciate the attendance as always. See you in 2 weeks.